Are you ready for some calls, Johnny?
That I am.
You are? All right. So
Mhm.
we're going to talk to Bill. Pronouns are he, him in Pennsylvania. Bill, you are live on Talk Heathen. What would you like to talk about today?
Oh, hi, Ben. Yeah, both of you can weigh in on this. It's just probably this topic has been done to death. If a male goes through puberty and then transitions into a woman and then decides to go out for sports, aren't they? What's the kind of the secular take on that? Aren't they at an advantage? I can recall I'm 75, so I can remember back in, I think it was the 70s, where Dave Richards, the tennis playing dentist, transitioned into a woman and then started competing with women. I think I don't know whether he actually won a tournament or not. Well, anyway, that's it. You get the idea. What's the explanatory strategy with that?
So before I go into exactly the data that I have, because of course I've argued this issue on many occasions, but I'm curious about what your thoughts are on it and your reasoning behind your perspective.
Oh well, I'm not hostile to anyone trying. That's perfectly fine. It's just that's one very narrow, specific, focused issue. Anything else, I don't see a big difference. It's just the sports thing, and I don't think that's a big deal. I mean, after all, it's just sports.
So I'm curious about your thought process with how we got to, because I know a lot of people have this intuitive idea that there's a difference, of course, between someone that went through male puberty and someone didn't. Do you think that how you arrived at that conclusion is based on data that you've gathered, or do you think that that thought is based on intuition and the common sense of, well, of course there's a difference? Or is there some other reason why you think that way?
I mean, maybe a little unconscious hostility or something. I don't really think that's it. But I've had a couple of units of anatomy and physiology, and I understand what goes on in puberty. Just it's pretty. I think everybody does. But it's just kind of a physics thing, really. I think that's how I arrived at it. These once you've gone. I have a nephew that's now my niece, and he's competing in sports, and he's talked about going, competing with women. He's 6 feet tall.
So I want to clarify. I know you're trying your best,
sorry,
but when
ahead.
if we're talking about someone in your family who is your niece now, I think we should address them using their proper pronouns. So if I'd rather we talk about them as she or they, or unless they've specifically said to you that they want to go by he. Just out of respect
right.
for them.
I misspoke there. I should have said I was talking about when he was a he, and now he's a she. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So the issue that we get with a lot of this process is that it is a very intuitive thought process between, well, it makes sense to me that the science is this way. But you look at the data, and we're seeing that people, regardless of the puberty that they went through, hormones do play a factor in their athletic abilities and their muscle mass. And there are studies that a lot of people that are not supportive of trans people in sports, that they misrepresent the data because it goes along with the intuition, and they'll change the graphs that they're showing, not representative of the actual community. So we're seeing that studies done featuring recruits in the U.S. Air Force, showing their PT scores before and after HRT, the hormone replacement therapy, they're showing that they are performing at similar levels to cisgender women. We're seeing that pretty much across the board, and
Really?
a lot of the
No
studies,
kidding.
that show that are trying to be used to show an advantage is not comparing trans women with cis women. It's comparing trans women with cis men. And that is a huge problem because they're different populations entirely. And in fact, uh, we have studies showing that trans women oftentimes already come from a physiological disadvantage compared to the majority of cis men. So even if you take this on averages, it's a dishonest representation of the data that we're seeing. So, um, what are your thoughts? I kind of want to let Johnny get in here if he has any opinions on this.
I'm more interested in what research Bill's done. And Bill, I'm not I've been accused of saying, well, did you take a class in it? Do you work for a lab when people start making cosmological arguments or, you know, these kind of things, arguments about physics and stuff? That's not what I'm after. I'm just trying to figure out, I'm trying to gauge from you, what work have you put in before you came to have this conversation? I'm not saying you shouldn't have called in. I
Yeah.
appreciate you did, but like, what have you done? I want to hear where you've looked, what you found, and how much time you spent on it, because that helps us understand you.
Well, yeah, just mainly stuff from the internet, mostly YouTube. I listen to all the secular shows mostly every week. This one and Atheist Experience and which one is this? Is this Talk Heathen or Truth Wanted? I can't remember. Whatever, and all the rest of them. So it's mainly discussions there, which are all LGBT friendly, which I consider myself to be. I said to Ben, it's just this one kind of narrow. And I was getting this isn't a deeply held belief or anything.
I think I'm getting it. Then what I would say is that this topic is very emotionally charged because it is adjacent to a lot of action on the part of certain politicians and religious groups,
right? Yeah,
who are trying to deny the reality of a significant portion of our fellow human siblings, right? Not billions, not maybe even many millions, but a significant portion of millions of people who are transgender. And rather than attack those individuals directly, although they do that, certain groups have fixated on the idea of sports because a lot of the science is ongoing. A lot of what we're learning about is ongoing. It is active. It is a new frontier of scientific discovery that is charged with politics and emotions and a lot of other issues. And so I'm not saying that you're doing this, but a lot of people are throwing around opinions. But Ben is suggesting, and what is trying to highlight here, is that we're not focusing in this conversation about the politics or the emotions or the philosophical ramifications of transgender people in sports. We're actually talking about the science. And I know that I have attended continuing legal education courses talking about the state of the law, which leans heavily, surprisingly, on the ongoing scientific research that's being done in this area. I'm happy to say that the CLE, the continuing legal education course that I took, looked at the science, looked at what the regulatory agencies, which are looking at the science, were doing. Now, I'm not saying they get it perfect, but I'm saying that the focus was not on, what about girls in sports? No, they were looking at the actual science of it. They were not asking about Jesus or Vishnu or whatever, or Thor. They were actually looking at the science and trying to determine the best course for the greatest good, to minimize the damages to all individuals concerned, and try to chart a course to the reality that we live in, which is there are some transgender people who want to play sports. I don't want to play sports, but there are some transgender people who do. And so how do we make that happen without unduly alienating and isolating those individuals, incorporating them into the world of competitive sports? And I think it's a great question, and I wish that the pundits would shut their faces and let the experts talk about it. So that really is all I have to say about it, because I'm not an expert. My opinions on this are largely emotionally based, politically based, because I don't have the scientific knowledge. I defer to people who are very knowledgeable about this, but also I'm willing to hold back my opinion and allow the process to continue. But Ben is much more in this world for many reasons. Medicine, it largely is a reason for it. So that's
And
that's all I gotta say about that, really.
do you have any thoughts on that, Bill? Before I kind of want to go on a little chat with you, but I want you to be able to respond to Johnny, and then I'll ask you my question.
Well, I think I want to ask you a question. So, what is your? Do you think this is just? Is it? I don't know if red herring is the right word. I mean, is this just a non-issue, really? That it encompasses such a tiny little fraction of women's sports that it's just so.
Well, yeah, and I think a big issue here too is the fact that people are arguing about this issue as a broad whole of athletics and trans people, when different sports have different skills that they need to utilize. Different body types are favored in different athletic activities. And so this is kind of where I wanted to go with you more on this conversation. Like, thinking about sports as a whole, what factors would make somebody have an advantage in sports? Like, not even just biologically, but what makes somebody good at sports?
Well, you can't say it's just testosterone, because there are certainly very passionate female athletes that don't necessarily have all that testosterone, who are probably almost as aggressive as a lot of men. They maybe don't get into as many fights and stuff, but so what was your question again? What's the advantage other than physical?
Well, just in general, what makes people? What are some factors that make people good at sports?
Oh, just the way they're glued together.
Okay, yeah. What about
physiology? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's part of it. What about things like strategy? Would you agree that many sports rely on having a game plan?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you have to.
Does that rely on physiology?
Sport? No.
Could somebody
No, I wouldn't say.
with and what about training? Does training factor in?
Of course. Yeah.
What about timing? And even if someone just had a good day versus someone had a bad day, does that factor into who's going to win in a certain sport?
Well, you sure does. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a lot of variables that can make somebody good at a sport. And let's say I'm going to pick a sport that I do because it makes sense for this analogy, but take wrestling. I have two people that are going to be wrestling, and one is a cisgender male and one is a cisgender female. They both weigh 135 pounds. So kind of small for a male, kind of average size for a female. Do you think that the cis male would win on the grounds that he is
Oh,
male?
yes, yes. No,
You
not
think
on
that that's the
concrete.
reason that he would win?
I think probably his muscle mass is better, is denser. Now, if she's better trained and faster than him, that's a big thing too. If he, yeah,
Right.
like
So if they are
everything,
right, so you'd say that the male, just because he is male, would not necessarily win every time, right?
he wouldn't win, but he would have an advantage because he's like, if he's how old are these kids? Are these 16,
They're both the
17-year-old
same
kids?
age. They're both 20 years old.
Well, funny. Oh, so they got through puberty. Well, sure. The wrestling is this. There's a certain significant strength component in wrestling. And
Yeah.
you
Also,
would think,
there is a strength component, but think about the technique component. What about things like flexibility? What about things like agility, which might favor a smaller body type? Do you think that that might factor in as an advantage for the woman? Why is that not seen as a physiological advantage, but the strength and muscle mass is?
well, because probably the strength and muscle mass is more significant. Will factor in there.
How did you
And that's-
determine that it was more significant? Where did you
Yeah,
get that?
I just pulled that out of the nearest orifice I could find.
Right. So here's the problem. Here's the problem. Society, the way that we think about it is biased to favor masculinity in this case. We haven't done the math most of the time. Most of us have not done the math on what constitutes a greater advantage in that setting. So it's not really a good way to approach the problem. And the fact is that people have done these studies and have shown that this physiology might not be as big of a factor as we make it out to be. And that's where a lot of the debate is coming down to, people that are saying this is a significant advantage, whereas the science doesn't necessarily agree. So what are your thoughts on that? Or if Johnny wants to jump in as well.
I do want to jump in, and I want to take it in an entirely different direction. Supposing that there are certain physiological advantages that male puberty grants to the recipient, okay?
Okay.
Supposing that there are certain angles or something like that were to that a person who went through male puberty had a higher likelihood of receiving those particular advantages, right? I remember there's something about hip angle. Ben, is there an advantage with regard to pelvic angle or something like that people who went through male puberty might get versus a person who did not go through male puberty?
A woman who has
Ben,
gone through puberty.
Ben, you're on mute. Hold on, Bill. Ben, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Hold on, Bill. It's okay.
There isn't any evidence currently that would suggest that there is a difference with regard to that, or that at least that it's not a significant difference, or that it plays a role in an advantage.
Okay, what about fast twitch muscle fibers? What about something like that? Is that something that
actually favors females in the study that we're seeing? We're seeing denser quantities of fast twitch fibers in females than we do in males a lot of the time. And we actually see advantages within events such as endurance, cardiac activities. We see advantages with cis females over cis males. So there's a lot of factors that are not really taken into consideration. And I think a lot of it's related to society's assumption that females are by default athletically inferior.
Well,
So
are there any factors that might give an advantage to someone who went through male puberty? I'm going somewhere with this. Is there any advantage Ben?
Potentially.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that a person who did not go through female or through male puberty, that to the extent that that particular individual has similar structures, factors, features in their body, that might give them an advantage in that particular sport as well? Is that something that is possible to your understanding?
For me, can you clarify that like a little bit?
Yeah, see, I don't know. This is the thing. I don't care about sports. I actually don't give a flying shit about sports. I don't watch it. Whenever I'm forced to do it out of a sense of community, I get bored out of my mind. So I can't give you any specific examples. But assuming that there's an advantage that many
Mhm.
people who went through male puberty uh, get from going through male puberty, if there is a person who did not go through male puberty, but they also enjoy those factors, certain small percentage of people who did not
Yeah,
go through
yeah,
male puberty might enjoy that as well, right? And that might deliver them faster, greater endurance, faster speed. I don't know what, better angles on their hips and ankles or something like that. Then those individuals would excel in the particular sport. So all that you're really doing is that a person who went through male puberty who then transitions to female puberty now is in the same position as a female athlete who did not go through male puberty, who might have those same advantages, right?
yep,
That's it.
exactly.
It's like if there were something that gave a person who went through male puberty an advantage, it's almost like they are now one of the lucky female individuals who did not go through male puberty, and now they have that advantage too, but not because they were exceptionally lucky in the genetics department of being born male, but or being having gone through being a fortunate female to have those factors. They may have that factor because they were born male and they still have those factors. So again, it's such a complicated question that when we look at it from 50,000 feet, it becomes almost nonsensical. And so I turn to the experts on this one. And honestly, my concern is not with transgender athletes. It's important for those kids and those athletes who've dedicated thousands of hours to excel at a particular field. Honestly, the bigger fight is with basic rights, healthcare, bathroom rights, housing, voting. Uh, the statistics that show that teenagers are so likely to kill themselves because our society is so screwed up when it comes to transgender and generally LGBTQ people, that yeah, it's interesting for us to sit here and talk about sports and that advantage. And I hate for the perfect argument to be the enemy of the good argument here, but honestly,
Uh,
I don't care about sports. There's so many bigger issues with regards to transgender people that we've got to solve those because people are actually dying on those issues. So
Yeah, and with that, we've been on this call for a while, and I've enjoyed having this conversation with you, Bill. Um,
yeah.
I'll give you a quick second if you want to respond to what Johnny just said, and then I think we're gonna move on to the next call. Does that sound all right with you?
Sure, no, you can just go ahead and move on to the next call. That's okay. I think we probably exhausted this subject. I think I have a little more ammunition if somebody brings up that argument.
Yeah.
I don't
All
want
right.
to
Well,
change
Bill,
everybody's
if they
mind or
give you
not.
that, if they start tying into transgender people in sports, start talking about kids killing themselves. You know, start talking about you know, people who are just trying to survive and live a life that's livable to them, and how there are those who use fucking Jesus to try to take that away from them. Um, that's like
Yeah.
hitting them over the head with a frying pan because they're concerned about the order of the silverware. That's in the drawer. That's my thought on this. But not that I'm faulting you for asking this question. This is something that, again, is interesting to me, but there's bigger issues. And I think there's enough of a cloud of lack of knowledge at this point where we can focus on those bigger issues, and we'll get to those. And the science will continue to progress, especially if we give the scientists the political freedom and funding to explore those things and make a decision based upon what reality dictates, not what, I don't know, someone's pastor has to say about the subject. I don't think you're doing that. I think maybe you're fallen prey. You've taken the bait, or you don't want to take the bait. You want to shift the dynamic. And that's how I suggested, get out of the sports issue, start talking about the big issues. But thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, thank you both.
Yeah, I agree.